Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of our Jack Westin MCAT podcast. Today's episode will be another Cars Reading Skills workshops with your hosts, Jack and Molly. Jack, we've had so much fun over the past couple weeks and throughout this series. We've done so many different types of passages, and I'm really excited to go over this one with you today.
Yeah, this is, I feel like a good kind of culmination of like all of the ones we've done. Like it kind of like has a little bit of each of them, you
Yeah,
know.
it does.
So I'm excited to go over that and see how we can tackle those different elements.
Yeah, and it's fun because I feel like a lot of people really don't like literature passages. That's one of the subjects that I hear again and again, like, I just hate literature. Literature, history, philosophy, I see as like the big three. Is that what you hear from students too, Jack?
It's always going to be something different. And I think it's because everyone's so unique, right? Like some
Yeah.
people may have traveled to, I don't know, Italy and have seen, architecture there and they like architecture, but then someone else is invested in sports and so if they get a passage that talks about sports, then they're happy about it. It's just, I feel like it's so different depending on the person. And the
Yeah.
best way to tackle this is to just ask yourself, like, what do I struggle with? What do I not like? Maybe it's economics. Maybe
Mhm.
it's art history. Maybe it could be so. It's such a unique array of offerings that they provide students that you just need to do enough passages to know what you're weakest in and tackle those. But yeah, I would say the typical ones that you just mentioned are common problems for most students.
Yeah. And I love that you bring that up because it reminds me, for anyone listening, I teach cars office hours every week for our course students. And one resource that's free that most people don't realize has this feature, our Q bank on our website that's free that you can go on. I think we have like 2,500 cars questions with passages. But most people don't know that you can actually sort by specific subjects. So just so you know, if you think in particular literature or history or philosophy or whatever government, whatever subject that scares you or you're weaker in that, you can go to our homepage, go to our QBank, and you can actually get practice with 5 literature passages back to back. It tends to be kind of nice if you know that you're weaker or you dislike a particular subject because one, it's kind of like exposure therapy, right? You're getting used to it. But also, you might start to recognize similarities in structure or in tone or approach made by different authors within the same subject. So, if you want practice with any particular subject, please check it out. We've got so many passages available to you guys for free, especially with cars, incredibly, incredibly high quality. And you can sort by subject. That was a great feature, Jack. I feel like students get a lot of use out of that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think practice is everything. And if you can target your practice with specific passage types, like the way you can do it on our QBank, and again, completely free for everyone. And a lot of students don't realize why it's free. They're like, wait, is it free because it's not good? And
Yeah.
and the reason why it's free is because we've been helping students for over 10 years in our courses and tutoring, and they do really well, right? Like tutoring works. Tutor if you can get someone one-on-one to help you that's really professional and experienced, you're obviously going to improve, right? Especially if that person has a proven track record of helping others. And so looking at that for years, helping students in that way, which is a privilege. It's an honor to help future doctors accomplish their dreams and become doctors. But ultimately, I've noticed there are students that just can't afford it or
Mhm.
they just don't know about it. And
Mhm.
so we wanted to make a difference in people's lives and allow them the opportunity to study and become doctors, even if there are financial barriers, even if there are accessibility barriers. And that's why everything we do is on the internet. That's why 99% of everything we have is completely free. It's because we really want to make sure everyone has an equal opportunity to achieve their dreams. And so
Yeah.
this is industry standard. Our questions, our textbooks, everything we have is at or above what's out there. And so
Mhm.
before you invest, at least give it a shot, check it out. And if you decide it's not for you, great. Go find something that is, because there are some amazing resources out there. Like UWorld's great, Blueprint's great. All of these resources are amazing. But if you can use ours and save 400, 500, $1,000, because textbooks cost $300, 400 bucks. QBank costs $400. If you can save that money and invest it towards tutoring, you're way better off. You're way better off, or a course, right? Or a car strategy course, which will help you with a guarantee of 5 points to improve your score, right? 5 points on cars alone, or a 515 course, which guarantees a 15-point increase below a 500 and a 515 above a 500 depending on where you're starting at. So, I mean, depending on what you need, look and see what best serves you. And you can always speak to one of our academic advisors. They're more than happy to meet with you and figure out what is it that will allow you to accomplish your goal or whatever medical school you want to get into. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I love it. Always makes me so happy whenever I hear you talk about mission, Jack, because that is the reason why I'm here. That's the reason why I love being part of this team, is because ultimately the number one priority is to break down some of these major um, financial and educational barriers that a lot of students face that are preventing a lot of amazing future doctors from actually being able to break into this space. So being able to work with a team that right has the ultimate goal of increasing representation in medicine makes me very happy and very fulfilled. So thank you on behalf of our of our audience for creating this team. Right, it's
of
really
course.
special to be part of.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's been exciting. It's awesome to see how we can do that together. So, yeah, very, very fun and
I love
excited
it.
for what we have going.
Yeah, amazing. Well, as we've talked about, we put out a ton of free resources. What we're going to do today on the podcast is kind of another free resource, but it's using yet another free resource, which is our daily cars passages. If you guys aren't familiar, we put out new passages and questions every single day on our website for both science and cars. We call them our dailies. This passage that we will be discussing today is the daily passage for July 9th. It's called Lewis's Narnia. We'll include the link to the passage in the description. So if you'd like to take a look at this on your own, or after, if you'd like to attempt the questions, which we always encourage, please do. Right. You can access this. It's also right on the front of our homepage. So if you haven't already, definitely check out the dailies. It's really important to get daily practice in cars so that you can build solid strategies that will be effective for you. So basically, we're going to go through this passage sentence by sentence. We're going to talk about what we should be pulling out. And then we'll talk about really what the main point was of the passage. If there's anything to note about tone or the author's themes, we will bring those up. And then we'll let you loose on those questions using the link in the description. So super exciting. What do you think, Jack? Are we ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. Well, as always, we'll start off with sentence one of paragraph one. And it says, S. Lewis maintained that good literature for children must be good literature by adult standards, although not every good book is necessarily good for children. Okay, this is an interesting statement. We're saying that in order to be good for children, you should be good for adults too, but maybe not vice versa, which kind of makes sense, right? If uh if we gave an adult book to a child, they may not understand. But I guess what they're saying is a book that's good for kids should be good for adults.
Yeah,
So,
and that
okay.
second part, that second clause is hard to understand, but the first part makes sense, right? Like I think anyone can read that and understand it, right? This person, we don't know who this person is. You don't need to know, right? They're introducing this person for the first time. C.S. Lewis maintained good literature for children must be good literature by adult standards. So that means I'm envisioning this as an adult, I have to be able to read that children's book literature and enjoy it and like it and think it's good, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, you're absolutely on point on that second clause. That's basically what they're saying. It's not the case where if it's good for adults, it's good for children. But you
Mhm.
don't need to interpret that as deeply because they're not prioritizing it here. They're
Mhm.
prioritizing the first half.
Mhm. Okay, so adults should like good literature for kids, basically, right? Or adults must be, still interested in this.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. I mean, yeah, I love kids' books. I love reading my nephews and my niece. I'm on board. Um, let's take a look at our next sentence. It says the current adult enthusiasm for fantasy, both popular and critical, has led to a rather uncritical acceptance of it, together with a certain recklessness concerning its nature and history. Okay, I feel like this sentence is a little bit more complex than the first half of our first sentence. Um, what I'm grabbing out of this is what is more surface level, which is adults like fantasy. We're commenting on what that means for us. And it seems like we're kind of saying both sides. We accept it, but maybe it's reckless. But I think what matters is adults like fantasy. That's what I'm getting.
When I read this sentence, I'm thinking I have like there seems to be a dilemma.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something going on with fantasy, uh,
Hmm.
and it says uncritical acceptance of it.
Yeah,
What the
I
heck?
know.
Uncritical. And this is that kind of sentence that we've talked about in the past, where when you see it, it intimidates you and you want to read it over and over again.
Hmm.
As long as you take your time and you're careful and you're focused and you're paying attention and you read it and it doesn't make sense, remember, it's not supposed to.
Yeah.
99% of students who will read this, test takers, will feel the same exact way you will.
Hmm.
So my best advice to you is keep going. We're
Yeah.
not at the end of this paragraph, and typically whatever they really care about will be explained more obviously, more easily. It's for the average reader, right? And so
Yeah.
let's go ahead and continue and see what happens.
Yeah. Let's look at our next sentence. It says Edward Graham, the editor of the Good Book Guide to Children's Books, declares that, quote, the crowning glory of children's books is fantasy, end quote. So I mean, that's a pretty direct statement. Fantasy is the best. It's the crowning glory of children's books. And we have this individual Graham that's bringing this up. So we're still talking about fantasy, but now we're saying children's books, the cream of the crop or the best is fantasy.
I can't even imagine what other kind of children's books exist other than fantasy.
I know. I mean, how do you define fantasy? It's just interesting.
That's another part. Yeah, what is fantasy? I mean, when I think of children's books, I always think of like, fictional stuff. Maybe that's what
Yeah.
it's referring to, but
Hungry, hungry caterpillar,
right.
something.
Right. I
Yeah.
can't imagine a children's book on dinosaurs. You're like, oh,
Uh-huh.
here's dinosaurs and here's where they existed like back in the day. Like I don't
Oh,
think
I definitely read some of those. That's
yeah,
definitely why I'm such a science nerd.
yeah. But like in terms of what children usually read or want to read, yeah, I
Yeah.
would imagine it is probably fantasy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this is interesting because this is now someone different, Edward
Hmm.
Grant. And so the first sentence was Lewis's point of view. We have to keep track of who says what, right?
Hmm.
So the first sentence was Lewis's point of view. This specific sentence that the best children's books are fantasy books is Graham's point of view, right?
Yes.
Extremely important because they can ask questions about Graham or Lewis, and you need to know exactly what they each said, right?
Hmm.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. So, but what makes Lewis's books fantasy and what fantasies would be good by adult standards? So we've kind of got a hypothetical question here, right? What does it mean to be fantasy, right? Lewis must write fantasy based on this sentence, but what does that mean? Um, and how can we tell if adults will like it? Because again, Lewis's idea is that a good literature or good book for kids must also be good for adults. So basically, we've got a dot, 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 like, so now what? What can we learn from this? Which will probably lead us into the next paragraph. And hopefully we'll get an answer to this question.
Right. It establishes that we're probably going to be speaking about or reading about fantasy the rest of this
Mhm.
passage, right? The
Yeah.
whole passage is about fantasy. So it's important to understand the author's perspective on fantasy, the other authors, the Lewis and Graham's, Graham's not an author, I think it's an editor, but regardless, their perspective on fantasy. So we need to keep track of all this. That's the hard part. And the
Mhm.
hard that's hard because if you don't care about fantasy or literature, then you will lose track of these things. Even though they're pretty simple, straightforward, that's where practice comes in. Practice reading literature passages over and over again to the point where you're familiar with these kinds of terms, right?
Mhm.
And that familiarity gives you the confidence to read and pay attention. So, okay, let's keep going.
Absolutely. Okay, so just to clarify, right, the things we're taking from paragraph one, we've got Lewis's idea, right, that if, good children's literature has to also be good for adults, and then best kids' books are fantasy books. And that's Graham,
That's
right?
it. That's it.
Perfect. All right, let's see what happens in paragraph number two. So we're moving on. The word fantasy has meant many things in the history of English. Okay. I mean, you're not giving me anything specifically that it means. You're just saying that it's meant many things. So I'm going to anticipate that you'll probably give me one, if not multiple, definitions or meanings of fantasy, which will help us answer our question. So I'm going to keep reading. Let's see. A survey of the various Oxford English Dictionary entries, however, reveals two basic meanings. Okay, so we started off saying there's a bunch. Now we're saying when we look, really there's two. Maybe there's not many, there's two.
Right.
Cool. Let's see. In its earliest uses, fantasy meant pretty much what it had meant in Latin, a mental picture or the faculty of forming such pictures. Okay. It's a little abstract. Um, it has to it's a very mental thing, mental maybe like imagination. I don't know where we're going with this. um we might get a clarification on that, but some sort of mental picture is a fantasy.
Okay.
uh let's see what the next sentence says, because that's the only sentence left. In short, fantasy was nearly synonymous with imagination. Okay, cool, thank you. Whenever I see in short or like put simply or something like that, I my heart always does backflips. Like, thank you, author, for summarizing that in a much easier to understand way. Um, I love seeing it. So, fantasy means imagination. It means many things. This is the first of the two that we will discuss.
Right, right. So this is important, right? This is very important to
Mhm.
understand, and thankfully they did, shorten it, kind of tell us in a brief way what they're really trying to say in this paragraph. But
Yeah.
they're not always this nice, and so if they're
Yeah.
not, you go with whatever they give you. But
Mhm.
usually at the end of each paragraph, uh, they will try to explain it in an easy way where everyone can understand. Remember, this is a standardized test that about 100,000 students have to take every year, right? Close to 85,000. And if that's the case, that means that the average student, right, in the middle of the 85,000, median, medium, and median and also mean, has to be able to understand what you're reading, right? And so in this case, this last sentence, everyone should be able to understand it. And that's
Yeah.
what they're going to be able to test you on. Okay.
Mhm. All right. It's probably a relief to a lot of us. Okay, let's look at paragraph three. It says, very early on, however, the word took on some negative coloration. Okay, so we started with fantasy is basically imagination. Now we're maybe going to get into the other basic meaning, and it's more negative. I don't think of imagination as really that negative, but whatever we're about to read is. Okay.
Sounds good. And I like how you were able to understand that there is going to be something negative about it.
Hmm. Okay, let's see what's going on. How is this negative? A classical Greek derivative of fantasy meant a ghost. We see a semicolon, so pause, reflect. Okay, so fantasy means a ghost, and maybe a ghost is negative if it's haunting you or something like that.
Right.
Okay, that makes a little more sense.
We don't know exactly how they define ghost, right? We do think
That's
of,
true. That's true.
so we want to be careful because um, ghost it could be negative in that sense, right? It's haunting, but that's a bias we don't want to inject yet. We want to just know that it's negative and it's defined as ghost. Let's see what exactly makes it negative. But it's
Okay.
not bad to guess at just I'm just worried that if you make these assumptions, you're going to stick to them, even though the author never brought them up. And so, but it's nice to guess and think about it in that way.
Hmm. Okay. And from that idea, it's an easy step to something with no extra mental reality or to something illusory, hallucinatory, extravagant, capricious, or even insane. Okay, well, certainly uh these adjectives are getting more and more negative. I don't know that every student will know what all of these things are, but to end on insane, most people know what insanity is, most people know what a hallucination is. Maybe this is starting to show some negative uh
Yeah.
color.
It's not haunting, right? It's more that it doesn't seem real, right? You hallucinate. Hallucinations are not real. They're in our mind, right? And it says extra mental reality. No extra mental reality. So no reality. So some of it I get, some of it I don't get, right? But that's okay. Let's keep going and let's see where this is headed. At least we know a couple of things. One, that the definition here of fantasy is ghost, that it's negative, and it could be because it's not real or it's not like like something you can touch or feel or
Mhm.
actually see. So let's see where it's going.
Okay. On the whole, one may say that from Plato to John Dryden, fantasy meant either a mental image or appearance of, in parentheses here, often with a negative implication, something unreal. So yeah, it's something unreal. I feel like that is more direct than the last sentence. So here, fantasy is this image of something unreal.
That's it. And is that a negative or positive thing?
I mean, the word unreal might be neutral, but the author is attaching this negative idea. It's got a
That's
negative implication according to the author.
Yeah, see, Unreal doesn't mean any like it's not positive or negative. Unreal is
Mhm.
just unreal, right?
Mhm.
But to the author in literature, it sounds like a bad thing. It's a
Yeah.
negative thing, right? And they're
Yeah.
telling you that. So you stick to whatever the author says, you go with that, right?
Yeah.
So even though we may disagree, but it doesn't matter because we have to answer questions based on the author. And so,
Hmm.
okay.
Yes. We will become the author for the questions and answer
Right.
in their perspective. Okay, in more recent times, while the word imagination has replaced fantasy in its neutral sense, the association of fantasy with unreality has persisted, though with lessening disapproval. Okay, what I'm seeing that's very similar is fantasy, unreality, that is persisting. That is fantasy and unreality are linked. Okay, it sounds like we're getting now into imagination and maybe we're less negative, but what I'm seeing as something that's concrete is fantasy and unreality. That association is persisting. It's stuck, right? Fantasy should be tied with unreality.
Yeah, and it says though with lessening disapproval, meaning it might have gone better, but that
Slightly
assumes
less
that
negative.
yeah, less negative, but assumes that there is still negativity, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. I mean, as long as you know that, the other definition is ghost and fantasy is something that's unreal, right? Then
Hmm.
you're fine for this paragraph.
Hmm. Okay. Cool. Um, let's take a look at our, what is this, fourth paragraph. It says, as a name for a genre of literature, the term fantasy was used at least as early as Joseph Addison's Spectator, paper number 419. Okay, so now we're not going just from not we're not just determining the definition of fantasy. We're talking about how it's a genre. I don't really think I'm getting a ton out of this sentence, but now I get that we're talking about fantasy as a genre and not just a word. So I think it's just going to set up that kind of discussion.
Right. I mean, it's just talking about the history of the word at this
Hmm.
point. And when was it brought up? Let's see where this is going.
Yeah.
Pretty like not unimportant sentence, right? Just
Yeah,
establishing like fantasy, the discussion of fantasy again, which we've already been doing. So,
exactly. Yeah. Okay. So although not entirely disapproving, Addison obviously regards it as a minor species of fiction, and he uses the word to mean pretty much what it had always meant. Quote, something unreal, end quote. Something belonging entirely to the imagination and deriving ultimately from superstition. So Addison believes that fantasy is unreal, right? It's this image of something unreal. Basically, we're just stating, hey, Addison agrees. And
Right.
that's it.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
literally, this is exactly the same as the previous paragraph. Now it does say entirely to the imagination. So kind of going back to paragraph two, but really emphasizing the unreal part.
Yeah. That's
And
the
so
quote, too.
that's the quote. That's the quote. Yeah. So something unreal. So okay, let's keep going.
Hmm. Okay, to Addison and Dryden, A Midsummer's Night or A Midsummer Night's Dream and the Arthurian stories were fantasy. Okay, cool. So these are just examples of things that are fantasy.
I wouldn't track this. I wouldn't keep track. I mean, like it's important to know that this was brought up, but I would not map this or highlight it or anything. I would just know that it's there,
Yeah,
right? For this paragraph, the key is knowing that they're reconfirming their definition of unreal with Addison's perspective.
yeah.
So this argument that the definition of fantasy is that it's something unreal and it's got a negative connotation. It's
Hmm.
now in two paragraphs,
Yes,
paragraph three and paragraph four. And
yes.
that to me seems to be the main argument because it's repeating, it's coming
Hmm.
back up. It's that important to the author that they had to bring it up. Now, the rest of this paragraph passage could continue talking about it. There could be a third paragraph about this, right? But there may not. They may go into a tangent and talk about something totally different. And it's still your responsibility as the test taker to know what is the author's most important claim, right? Their most important claim is the one that repeats the most, right? The ones that repeat the most, or anything that's appearing in more than one paragraph. And that happens to be this idea, right? At least this idea. Now, there could be more, right? You could even say fantasy is imagination too, but there seems to be a bigger emphasis on the fact that it's defined as unreal and that's negative. So
Yeah,
that's what I would focus most of my attention to.
yeah. I like that. Okay, well, let's see if we do continue. Um, we're going to look now at paragraph number 5. So, fantasy is a world of the mind cut off from factual phenomena. I see a semicolon, so pause. That kind of feels a little bit consistent with what we've read before, right? Factual phenomena sounds like reality. It's cut off. I don't know exactly how the author wants us to interpret that. I think it's similar enough to what we read to keep reading and see. Um, and when this theory is applied to allegory, the effects of fantasy are exaggerated to the detriment of the form. Okay, I was hoping that that second clause was going to explain the first, but I think now it's getting a little bit less tangible. Effects of fantasy are exaggerated, and that's a bad thing. That's what I see. I'm not sure where we're going with allegory, but right, I'm going to probably keep reading and see.
Yeah, this is not easy to understand, but
Yeah.
I can so see students freaking out over the word allegory.
Uh-huh.
That means that's such a literature term, right? It means
Yeah.
like symbolic, right? Something that's symbolic. But just keep going. Again, if it's important, they like to
Let's say it
paraphrase
again.
it and make it very obvious and easy.
Yes.
So let's keep going and seeing where this goes.
Yeah. Okay, next sentence says, it's not my purpose here to spell out in detail these effects on Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen. Okay, I wasn't thinking that was going to be your purpose, but now I know it's not, right? I like that the author's saying that is not my purpose. Um, I'm wondering now, what is your purpose then? Right? I don't know the Fairy Queen. I'm not familiar with this, but then what is the point of this? I feel like they're about to tell us.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay, one last long sentence.
And
I should
yeah, sorry to interrupt.
no, go
It
ahead.
did say my, right? And
Exactly.
so my is who?
The author.
So I'm like really paying attention here because it seems
Yeah.
like the author is about to give us their opinion, right, on
Mhm.
something. I don't know exactly what's going on, with Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, but I know that the author is trying to make a point. So let's keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And the next sentence starts with I also. So really,
Ah,
really pay it close.
right.
So I should wish to insist, however, that after we have conceded that the poem is not always allegorical and that the human characters are sometimes brilliantly realized, nevertheless, the abstract idea is an ever-present element and or sometimes a dominating one in Spenser. Okay. That's really not that much more clear. Um, I don't even know how to break this down.
No,
What should we be getting from this?
you know, this is the exhausting sentence because it says
Mhm.
I, and I want to pay attention and find something.
Exactly.
I don't, it's so frustrating, right?
Mhm.
Trust yourself. Trust the work that you've put into this, right?
Mhm.
Like this doesn't seem obvious. Nothing here is obviously easy to read. I'm not saying ignore it. We're not saying don't pay attention when it's this deep and dense. What we're saying
Mhm.
is don't lose sight of what you're trying to do here. Don't lose focus. Don't panic. Don't go into despair. Keep going. We have one more sentence. It might clear up and it might not. If it doesn't, that's okay. We just know that this paragraph was talking about something to do with the Fairy Queen, and we're done because I didn't see anything about the Fairy Queen anywhere else, right? But
Mhm.
but ultimately, there is one more sentence, and I'm eager to read it.
Yes. Okay, let's wrap up paragraph 5. So, as an allegory, Spenser's Fairy Queen is a sort of fantasy. Okay. I still don't perfectly understand what an allegory is, but I certainly get that the author is arguing Fairy Queen is fantasy. So I'm gonna, wash my hands of that paragraph. I still read it. I still cared. But this last sentence is much easier to track. Fairy Queen is a sort of fantasy, and that's it.
That's it. I mean, that again, they cleared it up, right? And so
Mhm.
that's all I know. That's all I really understand from this paragraph.
Yeah, yeah,
And it doesn't have anything to do with the definitions of fantasy,
yeah.
right? They did decide to go off tangent and go into a whole new direction, and not even talk about the definition of fantasy anymore, or what by adult standards makes good children's fiction fantasy. So
Mhm.
it's really random, and that could happen. Don't be surprised, right? They can
Yeah.
go where they want.
I feel like this paragraph reads like the author thinks you know what the Fairy Queen is. Like this feels like the author is writing to another person that's well versed in literature. But
And
again,
it
we don't
makes
have to
sense.
be.
It
We don't
makes
have
sense.
to be.
Yeah, I mean, the author's writing this for an audience that reads these, fantasy books or, books, right?
Exactly.
And so, the MCAT's pulling this out, right? In this case, we are, because it's one of our daily passages. But
Yes.
pull it out as an example of something that you don't know anything about, but you can still pick up the most important parts of the passage, even if you know nothing about it, and be able to answer questions. It's a brilliant way for this exam to test your ability to think critically
Yes.
because everyone is coming into this passage not knowing what's going on. It's super random, and everyone has an equal opportunity to find out what's important and then answer those questions. So practice, practice, practice. I think that's really the key here.
Yes. Absolutely. All right. Well, we've got one last paragraph here, number 6. Let's see what's going on. It says, "This is not the case with Dante." Okay, so now we're talking Dante. We're moved on from Spenser's Fairy Queen. The last idea that we had was that the Fairy Queen is fantasy. So it sounds like we're going to say Dante's not fantasy. But I don't know anything about Dante. It's the first time Dante is brought up. So I'm going to keep reading with the anticipation that perhaps Dante is not going to be fantasy. Okay, let's see. Our next sentence says, even the most human persons in Spenser are to some degree personified abstractions, whereas almost all of Dante's characters are historical persons, as Dorothy L. Sayers observed. So to me, I'm reading this and saying Dante's not fantasy because his characters are historical. His characters are real, whereas
Right.
Spencer's are not.
Right, right. And it's not clear exactly what it's saying in the first sentence, but because of the last sentence where it's talking about fantasy, we can assume that Dante is
Mhm,
not fantasy, right? And this is
mhm,
why, but which is great, reading interpretation skills.
mhm.
But if they really care, they'll say it more directly, right?
Yeah,
So we'll see where this goes. Maybe this goes into a tangent again, a totally different way of discussing Dante, and they focus more on that than not it being fantasy, right?
yeah. Let's see. So Dante then is not writing fantasy.
So they're really emphasizing that, right? Because they could have easily said Dante is so and so, right? And that
Mhm,
would be more like Dante is more historical, right? And now we have to
mhm.
actually know that Dante is historical. They just really want you to know what isn't fantasy, and so that's it. Dante is not. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Hamilton tries to argue away these differences, but one only need imagine what a difference it would make to the Fairy Queen if, as Sayers suggested, Spencer had introduced Queen Elizabeth herself as a character rather than Belphoebe. I don't know who these characters are, but again, I'm seeing Queen Elizabeth is a real person, a historical person. And I'm saying it would be really different if we had a historical person as part of it. So again, historical people are not fantasy, is what I'm getting from this. It's a little indirect, but if Fairy Queen is fantasy and it would make a huge difference, maybe that's what they're trying to get at here.
Right. It's going into the details as to why it is or isn't fantasy, and I would
Hmm.
definitely try to pay attention to it, but it is getting very deep into it, right?
Hmm.
Who's Hamilton? Hamilton tries to argue away these differences. Okay, so they're trying to say, okay, maybe it could be fantasy to some extent, right? Now it's kind of going back and forth, and we're trying to understand this literature in a way that might be fantasy or it isn't fantasy. That's not that important. It's important to step back and ask yourself what's going on. And we already established that, so the rest of this should be easier to read.
Hmm. Okay, let's see what happens in the next sentence. So, similarly, what a difference it would make to the Divine Comedy if the action took place in imaginary places symbolizing hell, purgatory, and heaven, rather than in those very real places as imagined by Dante. So, I mean, I think we're showing why Dante is not fantasy and why the Fairy Queen is, but I'm not familiar with these works of fiction. So I
Right.
don't really know what's going on.
Right, exactly. Let's just keep going, right?
Yeah.
Don't be intimidated by this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There's only one last sentence of the entire passage. It says, I do not think that Lewis himself would dispute this distinction among kinds of allegory, nor my placing of the Narnia books in the same category as the Fairy Queen. Okay. So all that I'm saying here, we get the I back again. So this is the author. I don't think Lewis would have a problem with what I'm saying, basically. I don't think Lewis would disagree with me. And also, Narnia and Fairy Queen are the same kind of fantasy. That's what I'm getting here.
Yeah, and that's directly the author's point.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that I think that's important. I think there are a couple things that you need to pick out of this. One, Dante's not a fantasy.
Yeah.
Okay. Dante does not write fantasy. The other one is that Narnia books, right, are fantasy, just like Fairy Queen.
Hmm.
We already established Fairy Queen as a work of fantasy in the previous paragraph.
Yeah.
So again, really off from the main argument, right? The main argument, if you didn't catch it, you may miss questions. And that was it happened to be in the middle of the passage, right? That happened to
Hmm.
be in paragraph 3 and 4, right?
Hmm.
And so you never know where the main argument's going to come up, right? Whether it's the first part, the second, the last part of it, in the middle. We just need to read everything and keep track of everything and the structure of everything. So we now know all the big ideas. There was a lot of fluff, right? A lot of dense stuff, but that shouldn't deter you from the questions because if you know these big picture ideas, which what maybe is 20% of what we've read, you should be able
Hmm.
to answer all the questions.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, and by the way, for anyone listening that is unfamiliar with their strategies, these main things that we're pulling out of each paragraph, we actually have very specific strategies that we use to help map them and to help keep track. If you're worried you're going to forget it, or if you're worried you're not going to realize when things repeat, come see us in some of our free classes. We go over some of the very basic strategies that we talk about in courses and in our AAMC videos. But come see us because it's really special to be able to interact with you guys live, and we can help explain how to make sure you track these different arguments and points that are brought up throughout the passage so that when you get to the questions, you don't have to constantly refer back to what is actually written, right? A lot of this passage was really dense and confusing to read. So wouldn't it be nice if we could just have a list of the few things that were actually important to reference when we get to the questions? Like that would be a dream. We do have that. That's part of our most fundamental strategies. So if you want more, or if you want more guidance, come see us in our free classes, right? And we'll give you that sort of fundamental component to our strategies, which of course get a lot more advanced, and our strategies are pretty awesome, but at least the basics can make a really big difference for students. So come see us. We do free classes every week, including one specifically for cars. We can go through a passage together and talk about the basics of how to pull things out, just like we did today.
That was so much.
Um,
That was incredible. I loved going through this passage because it again embodies everything we've done the past couple weeks together. So,
yes.
so hopefully you have the confidence, guys, to tackle the next passage and embrace whatever comes up, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
easy to read or hard to read, don't give up and just keep going.
Absolutely. What a beautiful piece of advice to end on. So we'll end it there, you guys. I hope you enjoyed our passage walkthrough. As a reminder, the link to the passage is in the description. So if you want to try the questions out, we encourage you to do so. Also, if you like what you hear and you want extra practice, we've done a couple of these episodes, as we've been alluding to, and we will keep the passage links in the description for our past episodes as well. So you're welcome to go back, listen to those other episodes, try those questions as well. I think what have we done like 10 of these? Something like that.
Yeah.
So lots of opportunities to binge if you want extra cars practice. Um, all right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day or whenever we're catching you. Happy studying, and we hope to see you guys soon.